Hello, everybody. This is my third year working with Larry as part of our Colonial Waterbird program, but he has been involved with SFBBO for far longer than that. He was introduced to birding about 40 years ago by Lou Young, who was his boss at NASA Ames Research Center at the time and was also an SFBBO board member. Together with their wives, Jean and Judy, they participated in a lot of the SFBBO fall birding challenges over the years. As Larry started thinking about retirement, he decided he wanted to be involved in environmental conservation activities. He started doing easement monitoring and trail patrol for Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, invasive species eradication for Peninsula Open Space District, and snowy plover monitoring for the San Mateo County Park System at Kelly Beach in Half Moon Bay. He started with SFBBO about 20 years ago, doing nesting surveys in the tidal marshes behind Moffett Field, and then also snowy plover surveys in the San Mateo Bridge area. About 18 years ago, he moved his participation to monitoring the nesting site at Almaden Lake, which you'll hear about tonight, and also added monitoring at the Llagas Creek site in Morgan Hill and at Los Gatos Creek Park. He's also participated in our SFBBO Birds in Your Neighborhood outreach program and given a presentation at the National Well Connected program. So I hope you will all join me in giving Larry a warm welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, let me get myself up here. So, as said, I'm going to talk about Almaden Lake. I've been there for like 18 years, and I've seen actually quite a few changes going on there. And I'm what they call a citizen scientist. That's kind of a new term that come out. We used to be called volunteers, kind of. And the citizen scientist is sort of different than a volunteer in the sense that volunteers do a lot of different things. Citizen scientists are particularly focused on the development of and looking for data that supports a science activity. For example, bird nesting surveys, where we can produce a database on historical records on the kind of activities that's been going on in a nesting area. Has the birds changed? Has the number of nests changed? Has it been abandoned? And all that information then can be used by a scientist to generate their papers trying to explain and understand why things happen. So moving on now to the lake itself. I'm going, as I just talked about the citizen scientist, then I'm going to talk about the lake first. And then after I've talked a little bit about the lake, I'm going to talk about the birds that are going on that are around the lake. And I saw on the question, somebody says they're looking forward to ducks, and I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint that person because I'm not going to be talking about ducks. So the citizen, that's the citizen scientist. Sorry, got ahead of myself. So this is a picture of the lake. And you'll notice coming in down at the bottom, you'll see kind of a line coming in, and that's Los Alamitos Creek coming in and feeding into the lake. And then up here at the top, going underneath Coleman Avenue, Los Alamitos Creek exits the lake, and it's joined by Guadalupe Creek that comes in from the left side. And the merger of those two creeks then becomes Guadalupe River that flows down through San Jose. And we have housing areas on 3 sides of the lake. So I'm going to talk about the pre-lake area, when it was a floodplain, when it became a gravel quarry, and then when it became abandoned. Then I'm going to talk about how the lake was formed, how the park was established there, how it's become polluted, and then a little bit about the future. And I'm going to come back and talk more about the future at the end of this talk today. So this is a picture of the watershed area that feeds Los Alamitos Creek. Los Alamitos Creek is obviously the red line. It starts up here at Almaden Reservoir. And then over here on the right side, coming in from Calero, is Aurora Calero Creek that feeds into Los Alamitos Creek before it joins up into the lake, which is right up here at that little blue spot up at the top of this picture. Originally, this creek flowed freely down without any lake being there and joined with Guadalupe Creek and flowed on out to the bay. And it was an area where native fish could swim up the river and the creek to spawn. And the area that's now Almaden Lake was kind of an overflow area for the creek, and it was also a dairy area. It was a meadow. And then in the 1950s, a gravel quarry was established where this dairy farm had been at the intersection of Coleman Avenue and Almaden Expressway. And they dug 3 pits that they were digging out for the quarry with dirt left in between these 3 areas. So they formed 3 distinct pits. And then there was a levee that kept Los Alamitos Creek within its banks. In the 1960s, this quarry was abandoned, and the maintenance of the levee was stopped. And some heavy rains that we had during those time periods, I was actually living in San Jose at that time, breached the levee and resulted in those gravel pits being filled with the water from the creek and forming the lake. So this creek now, instead of flowing freely down into Guadalupe River, flows into the lake, which causes it to slow down and warm up. And then it flows out of the lake as a much warmer water. And it's very unattractive for these native species to spawn in this area. And also the watershed area that I showed you contains many of the mines from the new Almaden Quicksilver mines. And the rains, when we have rain, carries residual mercury ore and tailings down into the creek, which are then carried down into the lake and deposited into the lake, and they fall down to the bottom of the lake. In 1982, the San Jose Water District was given control of the lake and the surrounding area, and they decided to convert it into a park. And by the way, if you haven't been to it, the Canadian geese have discovered this park, and they are their year-round residents and very active. And the lake has been stocked with non-native fish to encourage fishing in the lake at that time. And those fish, what small native fish did manage to make it up the creek, were being eaten by these non-native fish. So this is a picture of what Lake Almaden Lake Park looks like. This is the island that I'll be talking about, which is a bird sanctuary. This is one of the original walls that separated the pits for the quarry. All the rest of them are underwater. This is the only one that managed to stay above water. And when I'm doing my observations, I do my observations from over here by the amphitheater. And then the birds nest primarily on that, which is the south side of the island. And I have not, in the 20 years or the 18 years I've been doing this, I have never seen a single nest on the other side of the island. They're all on this one side and near the top of the vegetation that's on the island. So these 3 gravel pits were up to about 35 feet deep. And when they filled with, and they don't really percolate. And when they were, as I said, separated by these walls or these dikes, if you will, which essentially eliminates circulation of the water. And these conditions have led to seasonal periods of very low oxygen down at the bottom of the lake, which contributes to the microbes being able to transfer the mercury into this methyl mercury, which is a really strong neurotoxin. And it accumulates in the tissues of the fish. In addition to that, they have, and the result of that, they have signs up now throughout the entire lake area that you can catch the fish, but don't eat them, and release them back into the lake after you've caught them. In addition to that, they've developed algae blooms because the lake gets so warm, and waterfowl droppings. And so they've had severe bacterial loadings on the lake, and they pretty much ban any kind of swimming. And they recommend you don't let your pets or your dogs swim in the lake either. And this lake was determined to be the most polluted lake in California. And the water district or the EPA basically told the water district, you have to fix this. And you have to fix it. You have to separate the creek from the lake so that we can try and re-encourage native fish to start coming back up the creek. And so, and you have to mitigate the mercury that's in the lake. And so plans were developed starting about 2012, and they started having public meetings. And there was a major outcry from residents around the area that lived in the condominiums that were around that they did, because the original proposal was to fill in the lake and turn it into a soccer field. And the people that lived around the lake said, that lake is part of our environment. It's part of the things that makes our property desirable. We do not want you to get rid of the lake. And so they've went through a whole series of iterations ever since 2012. And they've now finally come up with plans that were, I think the last meeting was on January 20th of this year. No, I'm sorry, of last year. And they're getting ready now to submit a final construction plan and an environmental impact document to the water district for approval this summer. And then they would start work on what they're going to do starting next year. And I'm going to talk about what they're going to do at the end of this talk. But the picture, here's a picture of what they're planning on. What they're planning on doing then is making a restored area for Los Alamitos Creek to flow down, to have a maintenance levee between the creek and the lake. So the lake and the creek will be totally separated, to make the existing island larger, about almost twice as big as it is now, and to add a second island off to the north of the existing island. And that's what this would look like after they propose, after their proposal is complete. And they think it'll take them about a year to do that and cost $25 million. So I was going to take a very short break now and maybe have people ask some questions. Serena?
Sure, if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and add those to the chat window. I certainly have learned a lot about Almaden Lake. I am not originally from the Bay Area, so this is pretty new information for me. And we do have a question from Ginger and Barry, who ask, how will they replenish the water in the new configuration for the lake?
They will have to pump it in from percolation ponds or truck it in.
Okay. And Connie asks if you will be talking about plans to clear the water.
The actions that they're taking, they figure will clear the water, although they don't have specific anything in their document that specifically addresses that issue, clear water issue. As long as the Canadian geese are there, there's going to be problems.
That's yeah, good point. And Hugh wants to know, where are the funds coming from that you mentioned?
The funds come from a ballot measure that actually was approved by 75% of the voters last November, which is called the Safe and Clear Water Program. It was originally proposed 7 years ago, and it was up for renewal last year. It was on the November ballot and was approved by 75% of the voters.
Great.
Improving the water habitat, wildlife habitat, was one of the 6 goals of that program.
And we had a couple people who asked about, I think specifically the mercury pollution and how they are going to mitigate that, or if there is any plan to kind of remove the mercury.
They can't remove the mercury. What they're planning is they're going to redo the entire bottom of the lake. They're going to drain the lake and redo the entire bottom. And then they're going to put 3 feet of heavy clay soil on the bottom of the lake to basically encase whatever residual mercury is on the lake, and then refill the lake. So there's no way they can get rid of the mercury. It's there. And you know, you can say, well, wasn't the mercury in the creek? Yeah, it is. And it will continue to be. But when it's in the creek's cold, creek's fast moving, the creek is not depleted in oxygen. And so all the conditions that would turn it into this methyl mercury neurotoxin do not exist. They only exist in the lake itself.
Okay.
Now, when, you know, not a question that anybody's asked, but a question that I have, just to let you know things that I've thought about, is since they make such a big issue about people should not eat the fish, the birds are eating the fish. Aren't the birds being affected by the mercury? And if they are, in 18 years, I have not seen anything. I have not seen any crippled birds. I have not seen any deformed birds. I've not seen any birds that are dying in the nests. The nest is such that I cannot see the eggs. I can only see the birds after they've hatched. So whether something's maybe going on that all of the eggs are not hatching, I don't know the answer to that question. But I've not seen any effects. And the rationale that I've given to myself is that the birds are eating the smaller fish up near the surface of the lake, whereas the people that are fishing are catching the larger fish, which are older, have been in the lake longer, and usually are deeper. And it's those fish that are being primarily affected by the mercury. That's kind of the explanation I'm giving myself. Is it right? I hope, but I don't know.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And we also had someone ask, since you mentioned that you've been monitoring for 18 years, what is your interest in monitoring this area?
Well, I am interested in providing this database and the databases on these nesting sites, one of the ways they can be done is they can in fact be used in environmental impact statements by people to try and assess what a development might do to an area. And in addition to that, I find one of the things I really enjoy is when I'm out there and I've got my telescope up and I'm looking at the lake, people and their kids will come by and inquire about what I'm doing. And it gives me a chance to interact with the people and tell them about the birds, tell them about SFBBO, and tell them about the activities that are going on. And this is an example. A couple of years ago, I was set up observing, and this father with his 2 young children came along, and I asked them if they would like to see the birds out on the lake, and they said yes. So I set up my scope by a bench so they could look. And the dad kind of looks at me and he says, "Those white spots are all birds?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "I thought that was trash blowing out onto the island and being caught in the branches." And he says, "I'll have to start bringing my binoculars with me when we come out here." I said, "Yeah, that would be a good idea."
That's great. And regarding these new plans for Almaden Lake, Ginger and Mary asked if both islands will be bird sanctuaries?
Yes. Although it's very interesting in the description of for this program, this project, and the construction plan and the environmental impact statement, birds are not a big issue. The primary 2 things they're trying to do is restore Los Alamitos Creek and get rid of the mercury. In their documentation, other than the fact they talk about nesting, they talk about land birds and they talk about raptors. They never mention water birds. You know, and all they do, but they do say they will retain the bird sanctuary, and they're going to add a new nest to hopefully increase it. The birds are included under what they call recreational activities, which is kind of disappointing in reality.
Well, keeping on the theme about the birds, Michelle asked, what will happen to the birds when the water is drained?
Most of the work will take place not during, not during the breeding season. The breeding season is from the 1st of February to like the 1st of August. So most of the work is going to take place after the nests after the birds have all hatched and are migrating. So it's going to be a good question. My concern is that probably we will lose 1 year of nesting on the island from the construction work. Will the birds come back? That's going to be an interesting question.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see in a few years as you keep monitoring it.
Yep.
What will happen? Yeah. And then I guess since we're talking about the birds, I want to go on to the next bird question. Have you noticed higher or lower numbers of fish-eating raptors, so ospreys or bald eagles, for example?
In 18 years of observing that lake, I have seen an osprey catch a fish once. And that's it. I have not seen any other raptors in that area, which is kind of amazing to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then going back to another question from Karen, who says, Larry, you mentioned Lou Young. Do you keep in touch with him? I have really wonderful memories of Lou and his wife Jean at SFBBO events a long time ago and hope they are doing well.
They are not doing well, unfortunately. They have moved up to the Seattle area, south of Seattle, where their daughter lives. And they are in a care facility. And they're getting along, but they're not doing great.
I'm sorry to hear that, but thank you for the update. I know that we have some people here who know them, so I'm sure they appreciate that. And then the next question is, Dorothy wants to know, how deep is the lake?
About 35 feet.
Okay. And Mari asked, well, what group is revamping the lake and can the public get their plans?
The San Jose Water District. And yes, if you go on their website and look for Almaden Lake improvement plans, you can get the construction plan and the environmental impact statement documents. They held meetings starting in 2015. They usually had 2 or 3 meetings a year for the public. And that went on for about 3 years, I think. Not sure when their last meeting for the public was, but they did review the draft. They put the draft environmental document out. I believe it was last year for comments on the internet. What they have now are the final plans that you can read. You could also find, I think you can probably find some previous documents too. But it is available.
Okay, thank you. And we did have somebody share the link in the chat, so thanks for that. So that's all the questions for now. So we look forward to hearing more about the birds you see.
All righty. So I'm going to talk about the species and the nesting and a little bit about human impacts. This is a picture of the island. I took this about 3 weeks ago, first weekend in March. The white spots you're seeing are birds on the island. There's not very many. Two great blue herons had arrived, and both of them were standing in existing nests. There are 3 or 4 very large nests on the island. One of them is right in the very center of the island. Actually, if you see the 2 white geese, those are domestic geese that somebody let loose in the island or in the lake some years ago. And if you were to follow the rightmost goose and follow his head up, at the very top, there is a great blue heron that's sitting there on one of the nests. It's kind of a little light vertical streak. My camera's not great. I was using my phone. And then over to the right of that is another large grayish area, which is a second great blue heron nest that had a bird on it. The other white spots are either snowy egrets, or most of them are black-crowned night herons. And so this is the island that the nesting takes place on. And it's kind of interesting in the nesting themselves. The great blue herons and the great egrets take the top. They're in the top row of nests. And then just below them are the snowy egrets. And then just below them are the black-crowned night herons. I have seen little green herons out here, and in a couple of years, several years ago, I did see there was a nest every year. There was for a couple of years, there was a little green heron nest, and that was down near the water level. This water level right now is it's not fantastically low, but it's pretty low. And if you look at the island, you can see kind of a line that's going along about maybe 3 feet above the water level. That's the high water level that happens if the lake is totally full. There, the great blue heron is the first one to arrive. They, as I say, they arrived. A couple of them arrived the first weekend in February. I've seen them arrive as early as January, and over the last 18 years, they are arriving earlier and earlier. And so there's some general information on. They are big birds. And they have, amazingly enough, they have a pretty long lifetime, about 15 years that they live. And then we have the great egret, a little bit smaller, significantly lower lifetime. They only typically in the wild only live about 5 years. This is actually, I want to digress slightly here. This is actually one of my favorite birds to see, because they got personalities. And I haven't noticed it so much on Lake Almaden, but I did the surveying down in near the Llagas Creek area in Morgan Hill, and they're up in about 100-foot tall eucalyptus tree, and the nests are so close together, some of them are practically touching each other, and they have some interesting ways of working on the nest. One of the great egrets I saw there arrived. He would fly in with a twig. He did not have a mate yet, but he would fly in with a twig, but rather than putting it in the nest, he laid it down beside the nest. And he did this for about 12 times until he had about 12 or so twigs set there. Then he got into the nest, and then he reached over and picked up the twigs and put them into his nest. Then he flew away, got another 12 or so twigs, got back in his nest, started doing his nest. Another year, there was a great egret in 2 nests that were right next to each other. The great egret in nest A would fly out, get a twig, come back, put it in his nest, fly away. The great egret that was in nest B would reach over into nest A, take the twig out, put it in his nest. A comes back with another twig, puts it in his nest, flies away. B reaches across, takes it out of the nest, puts it in his nest. They're sneaky. Can't trust them. And then we have the snowy egret, again smaller, but again, they got a longer lifetime, 16 years. I don't really know what makes a difference in these lifetimes. And then the black-crowned night heron, and these guys can live up to 20 years. And of course, as you all probably are aware, the juvenile black-crowned night heron looks like a totally different species. And then finally, the little green heron. Again, a relatively short lifetime, 7 to 8 years. They're not a very big bird. Very pretty bird, though. So I've sort of talked a little bit about when the nesting starts. It's already started. I expect when I go out next week and do my next observation, there'll be nests for all the major 4 species. And I'll show you a graph in just a minute about the history of nesting. It fluctuates greatly. And then the nesting pretty much ends around the 1st of July. Probably by the 4th of July, most of the eggs have hatched and most of the birds have fledged. and they're just sort of standing around still bugging their parents if their parents comes in with food, trying to have their parent continue to feed them, but they can also eat on their own. Here's the pictures of the birds. The black-crowned night heron at the top left, in the center, the great blue heron, obviously, the great egret, oh, the little green heron, and the snowy egret. And as you can see, the red lines are the number of adults, the blue lines are the peak number of youngs, and the green lines are the number of nests. And the number of nests for the black-crowned night herons, the number of nests and the number of young, pretty much, it fluctuates year to year, but it's kind of fluctuating around about 6 for the young and about 3. The problem with the black-crowned night herons, where it doesn't look like there's very many nests or very many young compared to the number of adults there are, is the fact that they like to go inside of the vegetation to nest. They don't like to nest out on the outskirts, and so they're very hard. It's very hard to find the nests. I'm certain there are probably an order of magnitude more black-crowned night heron nests on that island that I can actually see from where I'm on my observation spot. The great blue herons, they fluctuate. They come, and typically there will be 2 or 3 nests and about maybe 6 youngs that'll come out of those 2 or 3 nests, about 2 for each nest. The Gregs were kind of peaked about 10 years ago, and then they kind of been dropping off a little bit in the last few years, but still producing quite a few nests. The snowy egrets have actually been on the increase, as you can see, for the last several years. And the little greens, as I say, I've only seen 2 nests back in 2008 and 2010. And the last couple of years, I've seen a couple of adults around, but they're not nesting on the island anymore. I'm not sure where they're nesting. I had one person that I was chatting with said she thought that they were nesting up by where the lake drains out underneath Coleman Bridge, but if it's there, I was not able to find it when I was looking for it. So let's look at a couple of things that have impacted, caused a problem. And one of them is the giant reed, the Arundodonyx. The other one is that about 6 years ago, the local councilman for the area decided that having a 4th of July fireworks display would be really great. And he chose Almaden Lake as the location for his fireworks display and big 4th of July party. I know that the Audubon Society tried to contact him several times asking about questions where the impact of the fireworks on the birds being considered, and they managed to make themselves so much of a nuisance that he didn't even bother answering their phone anymore. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the future reconfiguration. So the reed, this is a picture of what it looks like. And it's kind of like sugar cane or bamboo. It gets to be 10, 12, 15 feet tall. And it was covering probably over 2/3 of the island. And one of the and it's not really great nesting area for the birds. And the other problem was that in heavy rains and winds, it breaks off and floats downstream and would form a dam and cause flooding on the Guadalupe Creek. And so about probably 6, 7 years ago, the water district decided they need to get rid of it. And they decided to do it by, let me go to the next picture. They decided, this is the island now. So if you picture everything from the left side of this picture, for about 2/3 of the way across this picture, had this giant reed growing on it. And there's still some residual pieces that you can still see that they're gonna have to go in and take out again. And, but the birds were nesting over about the right 2/3 of the island. They didn't seem to nest too much on the left third of the island. And so their first year, they cut out all of this reed on the left side of the island, the left third of the island, and then planted native plants in there. And then they waited 2 years and they cut out all the reeds on the middle third of the island. And basically the next year, all the birds were congregated in the right third of the island that had all, I didn't see the nestings go down. They were just all jammed close together. There's a, I don't know if you can see it or not, but over in the right, there's kind of a dead tree that's going up, and it's got about 4 or 5 forks in it. That tree had 5 great egret nests, one at every fork. It was like a 5-story apartment building on that tree with all the great egrets there. And then now the birds are going back. They're still not nesting very much in this left 1/3 of the island, but they've gone back to nesting across the entire rest of the island now. So then this is a picture of the 4th of July event. Out in the center, we have the island. This red area or circled area under called A, that was the restricted area where the fireworks were all being set off. And for the first 5 years, they had fireworks. I surveyed the birds on July 3rd, and then I did another survey on July 5th. And despite my expectations that it would be a major disaster for the birds, it didn't seem to be. My 2 surveys basically showed the same number of birds on the island because, as I said, by July 4th, most of the birds have fledged and they're no longer hanging around the nest. They're just on the island someplace. And it did not seem to drive them away, or at least it hadn't during the 5 years that I did the observations. People I talked to that had been out to the 4th of July fireworks said it drove the geese pretty crazy, but it didn't seem to be bothering the birds out on the island, thankfully. Back to this picture. This is, again, as I say, the future picture. They had some interesting reasons for this proposed island, this second island. They're hoping to use it to decrease the number of gulls that are on the island, that are in the water out here, because this area where that island's going to be put is the major floating area for a lot of gulls, hundreds, maybe even thousands of gulls out in that area. Don't know if they'll be very successful. And the other thing they wanted to do is they are hoping that this will encourage the number of birds that are nesting on the island and increase, therefore, people's pleasure at coming out and bird watching. I guess a couple of other stories about the lake itself. Somebody had asked about ducks or other birds too. I have seen a lot of grackles in the area, and I've seen them out on the island, on the western or the left side of the island. Don't know if they nest out there or not. I've not seen any nests, but I've seen quite a few of them around. One of the things they've got going right now is it doesn't really show up on this, but they're going to be doing it. No, it does show up. These, maybe you see very carefully these little like Mercedes-Benz hood ornament signs, pictures around. Those are all solar pumps, and they're going to use those to assure that the water and the lake and at the bottom of the lake is being circulated to be sure it continues to be oxygenated. They have 4 of those out there now that are circulating to the water from the bottom of the lake up at the top to try and keep the oxygen content of the water up. Somebody had asked about ducks. Well, there's obviously mallards. There's pied-billed grebes. I've seen western grebes. I've seen buffleheads. I've seen every year there's at least 2 pair of common mergansers out there with chicks. And last 2 years ago, there was a pair of adults. Each of them had 6 chicks. Went back 2 weeks later, there was 1 female adult and she had all 12 chicks with her. I saw an interesting thing. There are cormorants that are in the area. They're not nesting, but they're in the area, and they like to roost on the solar panels of the pumps, spread their wings. And I saw a cormorant catch a perch, and his eyes, the cormorant's eyes were bigger than his mouth was. You know, a cormorant, when it feeds its prey, it throws it up in the air, and the fish turns head down, and then it opens its mouth, and plop into the mouth it goes. Well, this perch was bigger than my hand, and the cormorant could not throw it over its head. It kept trying to throw that perch up in the air. It would drop it, catch the perch again, throw it up, tried to throw it up in the air again, drop it. It tried it about 5 times, and it finally gave up and let the perch swim away. Amazingly enough, the perch did swim away. So I think that's about it. Do you want to open us up for more questions again?
Sure, yes. Thank you so much, Larry. And, you know, I just want to say that it's really great to see or to hear about all these different observations you've made in 18 years. It's really interesting. And before we do get to more questions, I do want to see if Gabby wants to say anything and, you know, maybe talk a little bit about the Colonial Waterbird program.
Yes, thank you, Serena. And thank you, Larry. I thought this talk was great. I learned a lot too. The Colonial Waterbird program that Larry participates in, monitoring these birds, is something that we do all around the San Francisco Bay Area. So we have colonies up in San Francisco and Oakland, all the way down through here in San Jose. In order to cover all of those sites, we're always looking for more volunteer help. So if you are interested, you can visit SFBBO's website for more information. We also regularly share our data. So if you want to find out if there's a colony near you, or if you want to learn more about a specific colony's history, I will post a link to a website in the chat in just a minute where you can look for more information. And then you can always reach out to SFBBO staff if you have any questions about the program or the birds.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gabby. And I will also be sure to share those links in a follow-up email with everybody. So Larry, going back to some of the plans for the lake, Gary wanted to know, from where will the water be pumped in to maintain the lake?
I don't specifically remember. It is in the documentation for the lake work, but I don't specifically remember, I'm afraid, where that was going to come from.
Okay. And now going back to birds. So Gina wants to know, are the heron nests in the trees or are they on the ground?
No, they're all above ground. The only people that the only birds that nest on the ground are Canada geese.
Oh, okay. And Laura wants to know, do you know if Valley Water does any nesting bird surveys on the island currently or in past years?
The water district does do some sort of surveys. And you have to be an employee of the water district to go out on the island. They don't let me go out on the island. I don't know. I'm assuming they do surveys. They are going to be doing surveys with a certified biologist prior to the start of construction and a couple of other times during the construction. Some of the things they talk about doing, I'm not too happy with, because they're talking about maybe eliminating some nests that are not being actively used. And I would hate to see these really large great blue heron and great egret nests be destroyed.
You also mentioned about how they're trying to decrease the number of gulls. So Ginger and Barry were curious about why they are trying to decrease the number of gulls.
I don't have any idea. They did not provide me with an answer to that question.
Okay. I don't know if Gabby might want to weigh in on that with the issue of gulls in the area.
I don't know specifically about the gulls that are at Almaden Lake, but I do know that SFBBO also has been doing a very long-term monitoring project on California gull population numbers in the Bay Area in general, and they have grown exponentially over the last 20 or 30 years. So that is something that a lot of different organizations are looking at because California gulls specifically can prey upon some of the more vulnerable species that we're trying to protect. So that is also something you could learn more about on our website.
Yeah. The gulls do not nest at the lake or anywhere near the lake. They're just resting in the water.
All right, thank you both for all that information. And since Larry, you mentioned Canada geese, Ronald asks, where do they nest? You mentioned on the ground. Are there any specific areas?
Everywhere.
Okay, what about some?
They've actually nested right along the footpaths. And they had a there were, after they had hatched at one time over on near the Coleman Road part of the lake on the footpath, a pair of adults had 6 fledglings with them, and there was a lady that wanted to get a picture of the fledglings, and she was getting closer and closer, and she obviously, you don't want to get too close to the young geese when the adult parents are there. They're very protective. She had to run for a while.
And related to geese, Vicky asked, has the increase in the Canada goose population had any effect on the colonial waterbirds?
No, because very few of the Canada geese actually nest on the island. Most of them nest in the open areas around on the shore, if you will. About 4 years ago, they actually hired somebody that had dogs that were specially designed to chase the Canada geese out, and they tried to chase them out. Didn't work. They just moved further away and then came back after the dogs left. It's going to be very hard to get rid of them.
They are resilient.
And they produce a lot of young ones every year.
Oh yeah, I've seen photos with just tons of little baby geese. And Laura asked, are there going to be efforts to control the Canada geese population since they're causing all these bacterial problems in the lake?
If there have, I'm not aware of them.
Well, I guess that's the last question I'm seeing so far, but if anybody comes up with any, I do want to invite you to enter those into the chat window. And I do want to thank Larry, of course, for this great talk, this very informative talk about a local lake in San Jose. It's really great to hear about everything that you've been observing. And so I wanted to ask if there is anything else you want to say to everybody before we sign off.
Stay safe, go out and visit Almaden Lake if you're in the area. It's a great place to just walk around. You can walk up Los Alamitos Creek quite a ways. It's this time of day, the weather's great. Go out and visit it. And if I'm there, say hi to me.
All right, thank you so much, Larry. And thank you again to everybody who is sticking around and joining us for this presentation. I actually do see one last question that just came into the chat. Kevin asked, is there no effort to control the geese population? If there is no effort to control the goose population, do you feel that there should be some effort to control them?
The geese are not a problem for the waterbirds. The geese are a problem for the people, the visitors that come there, because they leave their mark everywhere. And kids don't pay a lot of attention to where they're running around. And to me, yes, it would be great to limit the number of Canada geese that are there, but I have no idea how you're going to be able to do that. Because I think if somebody was saying, well, the only way we can eliminate them is to kill them, and I don't know, you want to do that? That's not something that's probably a real viable option at the present time. And but it's, as I say, it's a great environment. They got plenty of food because they're grass eaters, and there's plenty of land. Now, whether there's going to be massive working for this construction on re-landscaping a lot of the area, and whether that will drive them away, maybe, I don't know. or whether that will just cause them to settle in and concentrate on, you know, one particular area in mass. I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds like they'll be, you know, in the area one way or the other regardless.
Yeah, and they spend a fair amount of time in the lake, and the lake will be dry for a significant period of time without any water. They're going to put some sort of conduits in to carry the creek through the area that they're doing the construction work in.
So we're getting a lot more questions about geese, if you don't mind answering more
I
of
don't
these.
know much about geese, but I'll be happy to do my best.
Yeah, we had someone ask if the geese are fed by humans too, and if so, maybe there needs to be an educational program about that. What do you think?
They are certainly fed by humans, even though there are signs up, do not feed the birds. And an educational program probably would, I don't know how well it would work, because it would require people to stop and read something.
That's true.
And when people are there with their kids and they're out there jogging and their kids are riding bicycles, or they're playing games, you know, I guess if you put a sign up, if you could find a good way of putting a good sign up to tell people, you know, what goes in must come out. So stop feeding them. But there's a lot of grass for them to eat there, which is their what they do. They're great lawnmowers.
Yeah, that's tough. We also had somebody ask, why can't the geese nest be seeded with artificial white eggs? You know, where will the geese forage, and where will they be next? So I think that's a two-part question.
I guess that could be done if there was an effort to do that. I'm not aware of it or there being any such effort to try that idea. Where would they go? They might go, there are percolation ponds in the area, but most of the percolation ponds don't have a nice grassy area for the birds to eat. They've tried a lot of different places, have tried to get rid of Canada geese, and it's a real difficult thing to do. I have not heard of any method that is successful over the long term.
And then Claire asked, have you noticed any impacts of feeding bread to birds?
Only the fact that if a child walks down towards the shore, the birds head for them.
Good point. And now we finally have a non-goose question. Ronald asks, do the herons just eat fish? I saw a great blue heron eating gophers at another park. So have you noticed anything else?
Not where I'm at. I have seen YouTube videos of great blues, as you say, eating and catching gophers. And I know they eat lizards and snakes and frogs. But I've not, most of the great blues and even the great egrets do not seem to feed at the lake. They fly away. The snowies are all along the shore, and some of the great egrets are on the shore, but the great blues mostly go someplace else to eat, and I do not know where.
All right, well, we have lots of thank yous from people, so I'll be sure to send those to you, Larry. And again, I just want to thank you for answering all those great questions. And thank you again, everybody, for participating and spending your evening with us.